Okay, this is it.
The bunny broke.
Yeah, would have broken your bunnies. Okay, so this is the moment. Thanks for doing this. I don't know if you know why I'm doing it or the basics of this. The main thing is I found myself in a position where I get to engage with a lot of schools, or a lot of the time through work on a marketing perspective. But I think having come from a family where I had a much older brother and an older sister, I've always had networks of people that are, 12 to 20 years older than me. And everywhere I go, I seem to remember stories of schools and obviously, worked with you guys and that. And that's just something I enjoy doing. And the other day people brought up that why are you not telling these stories? So yeah, that was kind of why I thought I should do this, because rather than writing all down, I love writing, but to write stuff down takes a long time, and you've got to send it to people, and so I figured doing it on a podcast format is, well, it's probably not quite a podcast yet, but YouTube is the plan. So that's why, and yeah, obviously I was keen to engage with you. Engage, the word is we could just have the conversation. So yeah, I've sent you some notes to what we could talk about, but I do like to start with the family side. So the floor is yours to give a bit of I do know a bit about you, but people who are watching might not, so you can give a brief overview of but probably stop at the point of why you got into education, and then we can kind of go on from there.
Perfect. If I can just begin in by thanking you for the opportunity. It is humbling, slightly embarrassing, because to be honest, I think there are bigger and better people to interview. But having said that, I've got the stage, so I may as well take advantage. Yeah. And again, just like you, I've often played around with the idea of actually writing a book, because there's been a wealth of knowledge, experiences, amazing moments. And my greatest fear is you forget them and they forever consigned to history, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I think with my work ethic, I doubt I'll ever do the book. So maybe this is as close as it will ever get.
Yeah. Okay. But the book is, I think you don't put that aside. I think you must definitely. I mean, you're a history teacher, so definitely consider it. But sorry, carry on going about the family background.
Absolutely. So to begin, born in 1972, so 49, about to hit the magic 50 next year. Looking forward to it completely, of course not. But so needless to say, in terms of the historical perspective, born during apartheid, born and classified as a colored person. And to be honest, quite privileged and blessed in that neither of my parents matriculated. But having said that, they were both blessed in terms of a work ethic. Both of them got to management level through sheer sweat and effort and so forth. So to my mind, there was no excuse whatsoever for me to be lazy and so forth. In terms of my primary schooling, certainly, your sort of separate schooling. So I went to a typical coloured school in a place called Bosmont in Johannesburg. Relocated to Cape Town for 2 years, a place called Grassy Park. Finished off my primary schooling over there. So very much typical in terms of your coloured apartheid experience. From there, very blessed. Came back to Johannesburg and was lucky enough to get enrolled at a place or a school called St. Barnabas College. And they were very much stand apart or stand alone at that stage, in that they prided themselves on being non-racial, whereas there were one or two schools that said we are multiracial.
Yes.
St. Barnabas' sort of niche or perspective or philosophy rather was we are non-racial. They were headed up by a guy called Michael Cork, who was quite a liberal, almost maverick sort of person on the educational scene. And we're blessed that one of our sort of benefactors was Desmond Tutu. So around about grade 9, I was blessed enough to meet the big man. We came across, shook hands. He had won the Nobel Peace Prize. And I actually got to hold the Nobel Peace Prize. So, that's closest thing to glory you're ever going to get. So, again, amazing in that it was totally non-racial. And again, some of my crazy experiences in grade 8, my best friend was a white guy who stayed in Florida. And believe it or not, at that stage, I was white enough to get away and go and swim at the Florida swimming pool. My hair, I still had some, was absolutely straight. I was much more fair. And for a couple of days, I could be honorary white and go and swim with Mark Kershaw. So there you go. The other perspectives, good amount of my mates were black guys from Soweto. And you'd go and visit them. And at that stage, it was the height of the township revolt. So things like curfew.
In the 80s.
Absolutely. Curfew, army sort of vehicles on the side of the road and so forth, and you just sort of accepted it. Part of a couple of protests as well, where the police came onto campus. They actually arrested our headmaster, Mr. Cork, walked him off because we were part of the protests and so forth against the tricameral system.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolute education, not only academically, but in terms of real life experience and so forth. But again, blessed, because by virtue of the St. Barnabas experience, they were JMB school, which was the forerunner to the IEB. So in terms of the standard of the education, absolutely superb, and paved the way for me to be accepted at Wits. I must be honest, I was lucky. I was a slightly lazy young man, so I crept in there. But having said that, again, totally blessed, because the Wits experience just continued in terms of quality academics, opening your eyes, and just the things you learned on the outside in terms of experience, protest, other perspectives, all of those sort of things.
And why education? I mean, I guess what you've explained now in terms of your history of going through all of that, it makes sense then to go to be a history teacher, because there was a pathway for that.
Absolutely.
I mean, is that? I mean, I know you more from a coaching perspective, because we've coached a lot together. But do you think do you think the education background that you had a role in your coaching, or the other way around? Which molded which, in a sense?
I think both. I think the two go hand in hand, and I don't think you can ever separate the two, because the most important things when you're coaching is actually coaching the human being.
Yeah.
Yes, if you can learn to ruck or kick at posts or bowl leg spin, that's important, but it's about the values and the principles you're instilling, and it's much the same in education. So it's about creating the individual, and whatever trimmings come along with that, that's a bonus to my mind. So be it on a sports field or in the classroom, you want to invest, build, and just mold a quality individual, and that's what my perspective or philosophy is.
And the reason for history, again, is that based on your background, or have you always had this love or this interest in the subject of history?
Just always enjoyed it. I think like everyone, I had a good history teacher, a chap called Ahmed Munda, and he could tell a good story, like I think any male teacher, and of course you'd lap these stories up and you love them and so forth. And almost just saying, almost a role model of sorts, to say one day I want to be like that. And it was a gut instinct. I mean, I remember at that stage, Rand College was the only coloured teacher college at our school. Pause with that.
Yeah, we can close the door. Let me pause. Pausing at the moment. There's no need to pretend this is some production. It's not a production, it's a conversation, like you said.
So back to my story. I mean, I remember that Rand College came along to St. Barnabas to say who was interested in teaching, and I was literally the only one who put his hand up, and people sort of looked at me, what's wrong with you? I think people look down on education. High-powered school, so everyone was aiming at medicine and engineering and so forth. But it's always been part and parcel of me. It's just a gut feel that I want to be a teacher, that I am a teacher. And my gut feel and my instincts have always dictated my life to me. When to get married, when to have a child, when to leave a school. And thank God it's never let me down. So that's my instinct, that's my gut feel. I'm a teacher, born, bred. Yeah,
it's more than a calling, like you said, it's a gut feel.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with that. I mean, so from a history subject perspective, it was probably my favorite subject at school, and I have this reputation of talking too much, but I think that was possibly why history, and then I went on and studied English at varsity, and I loved the fact that you could write for days and learn this type of style. It suits my personality. I'm not a racehorse. I can't focus. I need to be getting stimulation from everywhere. So I think that's a big part of it. But from a history perspective, and maybe that's also why we've always hit it off, is I found history was my favorite subject. My history teachers at my school, at high school in particular, I found brilliant, because you're given this opportunity to understand life differently. Too many people, I think, kind of think that history is just telling you the past, but it's not. It's actually teaching you how to grasp the future. That's what I've always seen history, because it's not about learning the lessons of the past either. It's literally learning through those lessons how to manage the future. And it's not about not making mistakes, because we'll always make mistakes again. I just find you see the future through a different looking glass if you've studied history. I don't know if you think that's the right way of Or maybe you would have failed me at school if I had that approach.
Probably because you spoke too much. But no, I agree with you. I mean, what I always say is, maths 2 plus 2 will always be 4. End of story.
Yeah.
Simple as.
Yeah.
But with history, there's so many different perspectives. And it's not a case of when. Okay, not even so much how, but why.
Yeah.
So why did Hitler decide that 6 million people had to die?
Yeah.
And there can be 20 answers to that why.
Yeah.
And so long as you can justify that answer, I mean, it's, to my mind, it's the most brilliant argument, because it's taking on someone else's opinion,
Yes.
seeing if you agree, deconstructing it, formulating your own argument, having to accept someone challenging your argument, possibly backing down. And I think if everyone just took on those lessons on board, we'd have a much better world.
Yeah.
The whole Black Lives Matter argument, the LGBTQ debate, all of these things. If you had those mechanisms and abilities within everyone, we'd have a much better world.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it such a brilliant subject.
Yeah. I think it teaches you what true freedom actually is. Exactly. I think the way you just described it now, you don't have to have the same opinion and the same beliefs as the person sitting next to you. You might not even look the same. But your ability to reflect on what makes them them and you and how you can get along and work together or not work together but still respect each other, I find that's what I've learned out of history. And it took, I was on the opposite side of apartheid to you, I suppose. I suppose I was at the end of it. So I never really got to experience too much. But yeah, we were brought up in a society that was the way it was. And we weren't exposed to certain things in South Africa. And as we've got older, we've been exposed to more and more and more and more. And if you didn't have the approach of like, okay, I have to learn through my history lessons or whatever it is, that if I don't accept things and I don't challenge things, I'm going to be stuck in a certain way. And I think that's what the likes of the Hitlers and the Verwoerds wanted from us, is they wanted to keep us in these channels and these silos. And if it wasn't for subjects like history, we would have... My dad always tells me the story of, his high school history teacher would, at the beginning of the year, would take the textbooks and say, see this textbook, and chuck it in the dustbin. And then he traveled the world a lot. And he said that textbook means nothing. I'm going to teach about the world from my travels. And he would take the kids on the old black and white slides, and he would teach them from parts of the world and tell stories about those parts of the world where he had been. And I think that's possibly why how I grew up was because of what my dad had been taught in history and how he taught us to be. And I think and again, I think history has been a big part of molding our family, and I guess a lot of people's families, I suppose. But yeah, history I find it still. Yeah, I've only got one child so far who's interested in history, and it's her favourite subject, and she's blossoming in it. The rest, I suppose, are not like me. They want to be, which is fine. Again, you don't want your children. You can't live your life vicariously through your children.
For what it's worth, Danny got a distinction in history. That was his one distinction, and he's studying history at Stellenbosch at the moment. So
that's
there we
cool.
go. Which I'm quite happy with.
Apple on the tree.
That's it. Nothing to do.
How many
with
times did you whip him every day to say,
Never.
you better get this one subject? Okay, cool. Okay, so on the family side, obviously Dan's all kind of growing up now. It's quite a new. For you guys, are you home alone?
It is, and it's been another education, coinciding with COVID. So Dan is down in Stellenbosch, and I had my doubts. He's been with us for all of his 19 years, and I always used to tease him to say, you'd never make it in boarding house, you're too sensitive, and he'd get grumpy. But he's in a boarding, or rather course house over there called Helderberg. And to say it is archaic in a good way, it's just crazy. It's the building, I think, one of the buildings, the one he stays in, goes back to World War II. Wow. It is the most basic things. The shower curtains are like those butcher curtains, the plastic things that you push into the The water setting says coat and coat. It is ridiculous, but he's formed a brotherhood there second to none. Again, like my experience, Afrikaans guys, black guys, Indian guys, and they share the ablutions, they share the life, and it's been amazing. And it's been his saving grace from COVID, because a lot of the lectures are online, but you've got the boarding house sort of
activities. So he stayed there throughout?
Absolutely, and absolutely loved it. A lot of other education, which isn't necessarily academic, but that's part of growing up. So happy for him. The wife and I, we've had to adjust. She hasn't been to work physically since the hard lockdown. So she's attached to her computer and Microsoft Teams. I get home at the end of the day, and the day's had its way with me, and she's sort of energized, talk to me, and I'm just, please leave me alone. So it's a different dynamic, but we're finding our feet, and it's good because the young man's out of the way now, and we now need to up our game and reconnect even more.
Yeah, so, do the empty nest readjustment.
Absolutely.
That's cool.
I always remember that I did a rugby course with Investec, and Bram van Straten was one of the guys, and he had this motto. He said, every day is a school day. And I actually thought that is the coolest motto ever, and I've actually sort of adopted it because, needless to say, as a headmaster, every day is a school day, but also every day you learn, and I apply to everything. Every day you learn as a headmaster, every day you learn as a husband, every day you learn as a dad, every day you learn as a member of society. So to Bram van Straten, every day is a school day.
Yeah, shout out to that motto. It's quite like a motto.
I like it.
Yeah, okay. I suppose then he was his most, he was the metronome in terms of his kicking methodology. He had that specific system that he put the ball down, and so I can understand he obviously is built for that type of every day is a school day. Do the same thing, and makes sense.
Believe the process.
Yeah, exactly. And so you finished varsity. You get JCE. Did you go through JCE?
No. So that's proper campus.
Okay, that's proper campus. Okay.
Campus, yeah.
And from there, was Roosevelt your first school experience?
It was, and again, touched by the gods in many a way, because believe it or not, I had graduated. Obviously, by November, got my exam results and everything, and by December was unemployed. Saw an ad in the newspaper at Roosevelt High. So we're talking literally early December. Went for the interview. Thought I'd butchered it completely. Only to get the post. And so lucky in terms of last chance saloon sort of thing and unemployment beckoning. Lucky in that it was an established Model C school, but above all blessed in terms of the people I interacted with. And it was some absolute legends in terms of education. So Frank Dalbianca was the headmaster at that stage, but beneath him were some high-powered males. Dave Robinson was probably the single greatest impact or mentor on my life as a teacher. A guy called Ian Cumming, Dave Lovett, who went on to be headmaster of Hilton, Queens, and then Kes. Dave Ernston was currently headmaster at Kips. Alan Wilkie was headmaster at Randpark High. Trevor Wineline, Eden Glen, headmaster. And all of us were literally teachers finding our feet. They were more experienced than me. Yes. But to sit at lunch and hear their stories, to coach with those gentlemen, to go on tours with them, and above all, that was the crash course in teaching.
Like a mentorship panel.
Absolutely. Yes, you know history, and yes, you can cut the cloth or do your thing in the classroom, but there's other expectations. You will pitch up for sport, you will do this, you will do that. And they basically taught me in that couple of years more than I ever will learn or learned from Wits or anything else, because they walked the talk, they were an example, they were what teaching is all about. And simply all you had to do was follow them, and you were the made article, not that I'm the finished article, but you'd certainly get closer.
Wow.
So very, very blessed there.
Yeah,
spent 7 years there, and also just very, very blessed. Coached hockey, coached rugby, coached cricket, met some amazing people over there, amazing families, went on tours and the like. And just took someone who, because of my background, was totally oblivious to that sort of thing. So things like a derby day and so forth, and the huge extramural program, the grade 8 concerts, all of those things. That wasn't part of my schooling background. So to be exposed to that, it opened my eyes, and it really was a huge education and a privilege. So thoroughly enjoyed those 7 years there. It was ironic that to my mind, and I know Northcliffe's your old school, and obviously art on the sleeve and bias involved, I would have rated that Roosevelt male staff much better or higher than the Northcliffe staff at that stage, and no offense to them. And yet I suppose the numbers and the money and the quality went to Northcliffe and not to Roosevelt. I do remember Roosevelt drew a couple of rugby games at first team level against them, but still Northcliffe was put on this pedestal. Roosevelt was seen as the ugly sister almost. And yet, pound for pound, in terms of male staff, I would have said Roosevelt were better.
Yeah, I don't see. You were there. Which years were you there?
So 95 to about 2002.
Okay, so I finished in 95 at school, and Roosevelt was always our primary opposition. Because, so I think, going back to what you said there now, I don't think Roosevelt was the ugly sister I think it was Roosevelt was always older. And I think a lot of my friends' parents went to Roosevelt High School. They matriculated at Roosevelt High School. And then they moved further down Bays Nadir, so they ended up living closer. And Northcliffe was built at a time when a lot of them were getting established in work and jobs. And I think the only benefit we have, and I think Northcliffe would agree to this, is the biggest benefit we had was that Northcliffe was modelled on Roosevelt, from my understanding. The logos have both got the knight's head. I mean, it's not that you don't. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to notice the thing. And our benchmark was Roosevelt. So I don't think it was ever a case of the ugly sister or that. I think what happened was literally that generation of people who had matriculated in the 60s, late 60s. Northcliffe wasn't around. It only came out in 1969. I think a lot of those parents, they ended up sending their children to Northcliffe because they saw a new Roosevelt literally on their doorstep. And I think that's a huge accolade to Roosevelt. They were always, and I think they will always be, what laid the foundation for Northcliffe High. And I think it was a good foundation. A lot of our friends as well, in the early 1990s, we grew up with, my brother-in-law is matriculated at Roosevelt. So a lot of my siblings' peers were either at Northcliffe High or Roosevelt High. We went to lots of parties, or I'd go with my parents to fetch my sister, where the children were both from Northcliffe and Roosevelt. So I think you're spot on. I think Roosevelt laid the foundation, and with that came this standard of educator. I think they set the tone for the level of educator in the 1990s. And Northcliffe literally just went, we're going to model ourselves on that, and we're going to see how we can make ourselves better, if possible. And I think that's a huge compliment to Roosevelt High School.
No, absolutely. The tipping point in my mind came is it's always financial. And when your school fee percentage payment drops and so forth, and that was the issues. You then couldn't retain those staff. And people started voting with their feet, and that's when Northcliffe really took off to a degree, to the expense of Roosevelt. To their credit, though, they've turned the corner beautifully. I don't know if you've been to Roosevelt. They've found some money. They have improved the facade and the look of the place, and they've really turned the corner. So huge credit to them, and I'm just so proud and happy.
I see their bus service. I mean, because I drop my youngest at Cliffview in the mornings, and the bus is always there. I actually made a comment the other day. There's a young lad. He must be in grade 11, I suppose, or maybe grade 12 this year. But he would be standing on the corner of Northcliffe swimming pool on the road there every day, waiting for the Roosevelt bus to come past and fetch him. Or I don't know if it's a bus or a family. But going back to what you mentioned about those mentors of those guys that were in the 1990s, those male teachers that pushed everything around uniform and neatness, and some people might see it as archaic and old school, and maybe it is now, but in that time it was critical. Everyone was very proud of the uniform. The kids were extremely proud of the uniforms, and to see this guy, I even commented to my two daughters, and I was like, look at that guy there. He's not even from Northcliffe. He's a Roosevelt boy, because you can see, but look how neat he is. Every single day he stands there at 6:45, waiting for his lift, and he's neat. And he looks proper. He looks the real deal. And again, like you say, I think in the last few years, Roosevelt would be the first to admit that they didn't have a good spell for a few years. But to see guys like that, and to see the quality of their bus service, that bus is neat. There's the teacher that drives it. He's in his tie. He's got his mark. He's neat. He comes past Cliffview when I go drop off Liam or fetch him on the odd day. Roosevelt bus is there, and it's got fully branded neatly. It's impressive, and I'm chuffed, because as you can see, why I'm doing this is I want every school to be strong. I don't believe, obviously, competition is good, but I don't believe that there should be any school overpowering or dominating another school 100% across the board. Every school must have its strengths, and I'm just always chuffed to see a school like Roosevelt, because it's part of my history. Absolutely. A lot of my older friends that are my sister's era, from the early 1990s, are all Roosevelt people. I mean, there's parents here who, when I would bump into them and say, "Oh, your kids, are at Trinity as well," and it'd be like, "Oh yeah," it's like, I mean, Mark Rondi was his children were here as one in the prep school when my kids were in the prep, and Mark was a first team rugby player. My colleagues at Nike, I believe I only got the job I did at Nike because Mark Pollard was the Nike rugby manager before me. And when I went for my interview, similar to your interview thing, which you explained, similar scenario, I rocked up there and just saw this little advert in the paper, rocked up there, got to the interview process. I was totally out of my depth. But Mark sat there and he was a Roosevelt old boy. And he literally saw my CV and he was like, "You went to Northcliffe High?" I was like, "Yeah." He said, "I went to Roosevelt." And from there on, I relaxed.
Absolutely.
We had stories to share. And he knew straight away, because he matriculated in 1992, so he knew straight away what was in me. Because he knew what was in him, and he knew where I came from, and he could find it. And I think that's where school ties are so critical. And in this area that we live in Johannesburg, I mean, I get goosey sometimes because we are so blessed to have the schools that we have, and to see them all stay strong is so important for our families. I mean, in a similar way, Trinity was built off a lot of Northcliffe staff. That as the development went from Melville to Roosevelt to Northcliffe to here, it's come down Bays and O'Deal. It's just developed all the time. And it's almost like the younger staff who wanted to get given their opportunity, they might not be getting an opportunity in the school where they're at, they could jump to the new school that was being developed and they could take what they learned there. And I think that's why this school is the way it is. Is there were staff that I recognized when I started working here as a student coach. It's like, it's modeled on a lot of the stuff I'm familiar with. Same values, same principles. It's going to go the same way. Let's go work and let's go help. And that, I think, is a big part of it. So yeah, interesting. I mean, and then obviously you went to the real enemy of Northcliffe. And I know I call it the enemy because we I think Randpark, it was like Roosevelt, Northcliffe, and then Randpark was built after Northcliffe. So that was always the school biting our ankles and often beating us because I think Randpark always seems to find natural talent, I mean, especially in the time when you were there and I worked there even. And that's why I use the word enemy, because I know the short while I was involved working at Randpark, I wasn't well liked at my old school. Like I was a traitor. And then when I moved to here or back to Northcliffe to kind of work there, then all the Randpark folk are like, you traitor. So it just shows you the parents that take it seriously.
Absolutely, there's a bit of passion involved.
Yeah.
But yeah, moved across to Randpark, and it's, as I say, it was with a bit of a heavy heart because Roosevelt had done so much for me, but it was struggling. And obviously you say, listen, I'll put my shoulder to the wheel for a while, and after a while you've got to look out for yourself. Got an offer from Randpark, and again, one or two chaps, Alan Wilkie, had moved across and so forth. And to my mind, Randpark at that stage, not that it's my place to say, was a bit of a sleeping giant. They had probably 1,500 students. They had resources, they had finances. And to my mind, they were just cruising. They certainly, from a sporting perspective, weren't at the level of Northcliffe. And with a sense of pride, I think we managed to change that a bit because with myself, Alan, and then Anton Dempsey, who I thought played a huge role in all of that, we realized that we're absolutely blessed. As I said, resources, student numbers, and suddenly from there we just kicked on there. And my time at Randpark again was a blessed time. It was 12 years. I literally became known as Mr. Rugby there, and I never have played the game at high level, so again quite blessed at that. But again, blessed in terms of all the things I said. And then probably a big defining moment was Anton Dempsey. And Anton, of course, made his name at other places, did superbly at Randpark, and then, of course, had his crowning moment at Jeppe. But what Anton brought along was a vision, which I think he got quite a bit from his wife, where there was a commercial perspective. And what he did wasn't universally liked, but what he did was he earmarked a couple of us to say, I rate what you add to the school and so forth. I'm going to grow you, and I'm going to make no bones that you are part of my succession plan. Now, needless to say, it's a brave move, because when you do that for 3 or 4 people, you alienate and irritate 50 others. So there was a bit of flack, but to his credit, he stuck to his guns. It was Alan, myself, Guy Skitter, and essentially he groomed us all for deputy roles. So he created a couple of roles, he exposed us more to governing body meetings, budgeting skills, etc., management and so forth. Grew us in the position, and as I said, if not for Anton, I wouldn't be sitting in this chair, because the lessons I learned, the belief that he instilled in me, it really made it a very, very smooth transition. So once that was in place, I became the head of extramurals. And again, I've always been a passionate sports person like yourself. And suddenly, I had opportunity of resources, finances, numbers to paint your own canvas. And suddenly there were 2 Argentina rugby tours. Ironically, the first time I ever went overseas was through Randpark, Argentina tour, England tour, all sorts of things, where you really could take the sport to a next level, get outside coaches like Jimmy Brakey for the cricket, get an external sports coordinator like Steve Adelaide. So literally it was a case of, here's a war chest, go out there and just grow and make this better. And I think, we sort of lived that, and we got the fruits of that labor. We managed to win the KZN festival. I always remember us beating, I forget the Afrikaans school that joined late.
Port Natal.
Port Natal. And they're not the most pleasant chaps, and they thought they're going to give us a good hiding. And we actually beat them in the unofficial final to win the whole thing. So little moments like that, touring to England, as I said, touring to Argentina, just absolutely amazing things which Randpark obviously blessed me with. Athletics, also we could really sink our teeth in there. I took ownership of the middle distance and gave Northcliffe a good shake up with the Suffer squad. So just magical memories. And above all, just the people that you invested in. And one of my takeaway moments always came at the end, because after my 12 years, I decided I needed a new challenge, and it was Trinity. And by that stage, Trinity was the one rugby game that Randpark wanted to win. Early days when they came on board, we used to thrash them. And then one year they snuck us, and the year after that, they started giving us hidings like you won't believe. I can't remember the year. It was the year they brought in the experimental rules where you could do tap kickoffs to start and all sorts of things. And we played them on their field, and they gave us about 50-0, and they were just crazy. So anyway, as a first team coach, I always wanted to beat Trinity, and literally in their glory years beat them only once. But the year I announced I was leaving, our head boy at Randpark, Ryan Sidwell, his valediction speech was absolutely classic, because he said, Mr. Eckstein, every year you've trained me, you've said we've got to beat Trinity. And all I can say is, if you can't beat them, join them. Because of course he knew that I was leaving. So good chirp, Ryan, and all credit to you.
That's
but
cool.
Yeah, it was those magical things. Another one from the Randpark sort of memory bank is first rugby tour to Argentina.
Yeah.
And history in many a way, and our fly-off was our captain, a guy called Sakani Makanzi.
Yeah.
And Sakani was an amazing individual, mature, physical. You think Andre Pollard's a physical fly-off, this boy was something else. But to be the black captain in a foreign country, and I just remember our first game, you were there, I think you almost killed yourself on the tennis court. It was an absolute deluge of
Don't run across the tennis court in the red.
But the ref called the game off because someone would literally drown at the bottom of the rack.
Yeah, I remember.
But I remember we got on the bus to go back as a bunch of wet rats, and Sakani just started singing and jiving down the corridor.
Yeah.
And that was one of those goosebump takeaway moments. You wish you had cell phones in those days to record it. And those are the memories. And you'll see a guy like him on the street and say hello, and you'll just laugh, because those memories were just off the chart.
So TK in particular, I always enjoyed like coaching as well, and when I bump into him, he always makes the effort. Like I'll be driving or I'll be walking through a mall, and he'll hear the sir, and he's one of those characters that literally will be on the other side of a mall, and you get a bit teary, because he actually makes the effort to come and not just greet you, but have that conversation and that catch up, and it's genuine. And that was him.
Yeah.
He was this special guy. I thought that tour was just a mind opener from a point of view of, I'd never been on a tour where kids were kind of trusted with their responsibility. They were going to be kids and they were going to have fun, and I'm sure they did stuff that we didn't know of. But they were still responsible with it. It was quite an impressive bunch. I mean, that group that we took to Argentina was it was weird how mature they were for. It was the first time I realized that a matric group could be that mature and still be children. They were quite a cool group.
Better behaved than the sports master who went on the tour and did that in the middle of the road. I mean, that was ridiculous, but anyway.
Yeah, and people remember me for that. So, and I don't know why I did that.
Some blonde pale guy doing the haka in
Yeah.
the middle of Buenos Aires streets. It's
Yeah.
just strange. I don't know why they'll remember it.
And I don't know what was. I can't recall what was the reason why I did that. I don't know if one of the kids dared me or I lost the bet or something.
Hard to say.
I just remember doing it, and I don't actually know why I did it, but I did it.
No.
It was quite funny. The good thing we didn't have like as many
That's history.
cell phones and that stuff wasn't happening in those days. Yeah, I remember that tour was. Yeah, I mean, you were speaking about the Randpark experience. I must say though that I agree totally the role Anton had on all of us, because I mean he did a similar thing with me when he moved across to Jeppe and he asked me to come across there and work with him, and I'm due to have the conversation, a podcast conversation with Anton as well. We've already spoken about it, but I think he's one of the most dynamic educators across South Africa that this country has ever produced. And I do agree, because I have worked with Iris and she has mentored me on a business side of things. I definitely think that Iris's role as them as a power couple is definitely, you can see her influence, and vice versa. But I think Anton is a dynamic educator in South Africa. He's been able to do stuff, and maybe because he's got that attitude of I'm doing it, you come along or you don't, I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And yeah.
But also calm in his manner, unflappable, not in your face, and also good at building bridges. He had time at the department, which he used cleverly, and he knows how to look after people, so they'll look after him. So just very, very expedient, diplomatic, all of those magic words.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to mine. I'm hoping next will be with Anton, but yeah, I mean, he's probably sitting there, if he's watching this, just at some point he's going to want to know why we're not speaking about Captain Vortex and Captain Pepsi Boy and all the nicknames we gathered on tours.
That's why you have to write the book, because you forget all those things for good reason sometimes.
I think that 10-minute journey, or that day, I think it was the same day, it was the Captain Vortex and the Pepsi Boy scenarios, and I still remember at the end of the season, or the end of the following seasons, when I was coaching for Randpark, the juniors at the rugby dinner, I think it was you who gave me that trophy of that Pepsi. So, but yeah, that story was a story.
Money well spent.
Yeah, that story was an interesting story. But
yeah.
And then I think Randpark, similar to the Northlift Risserveld journey, Randpark came along, and was weird because in my entire time at high school, we never beat Randpark at athletics. Randpark was the dominating force of school athletics, and I think they'd won it for about 9 years in a row. And Northlift's goal was to beat Randpark at athletics, and since then they haven't lost. So yeah, again, I think Northlift's saving grace, or Northlift's attitude of this die-hard, got to beat Roosevelt in the 90s, got to beat Randpark in the 2000s, has always been what's kind of kept Northlift. It's this benchmark that they refuse to let go of, and I know it frustrates you because you've had years where there's been a dubious call in the last race, or all these kind of things happen. I think that's good for school sport. We want that stuff happening in schools. It can't be nice when you're on the receiving end of it, because it gets very frustrating, I suppose. But I think it's good to. I think we, again, like you said, we're blessed to have these strong schools in our area for parents and the children to go to these schools still. And I don't see them getting weaker. A lot of people who leave South Africa or complain about South Africa, and we've all fallen foul of that. I think we go through moments where we all say things about South Africa that we either regret, or we get shown up, or we are right in one of the scenarios. But this area's education is still some of the best in the country, if not the world.
It is.
The competition amongst kids and in the sports, on the sports field, the academic results are supreme. I think Wits, UJ, Stellenbosch, UCT, Tikkies, their top performing first years, year in and year out, when you see the results, are kids from Northlift, Randpark, Trinity. Parktown cares Jeppe as well, and Parktown girls or Jeppe girls. But generally, these co-ed schools this has to be a co-ed gold mine. for want of a better word.
Absolutely.
And I think teachers or the educators are critical to that. I mean, I got to know you at Randpark, and I always saw you as probably, like you say, you mentioned your mentors just now. You did everything. Like, and that was probably what they. That you didn't know any other.
Absolutely.
There wasn't like you weren't trying to achieve anything.
No.
That was the standard.
That was the job.
Yeah, yeah, and it was just fascinating because it was like you literally were cricket, rugby, athletics. I didn't see you so much at the swimming pool.
Can't cut yourself in half, and if you've ever seen me swim, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, okay. But I would have thought maybe you haven't been that guy that got to the Florida pool, you would have taken the gap.
No. Swimming and it's very social, that's about it.
Yeah, okay, no, but I mean, yeah, it's interesting because those are the big sports really in this area.
You know, and as an aside, again, it's slightly off topic, but it's what saddens me now with the modern or the new up and coming teacher is I don't think there are as many role models. I also think they've got a different mindset. So it's quite noticeable when you get your students coming from, you know, the tertiary institutions, sitting in the staff room a lot, going home at 2 o'clock sort of thing. And you may get into the ear and say, listen, this isn't the way it's done, but there's not enough role models, I would say. Either that or there's a stubbornness, and I think it's a bit of both.
Yeah.
So your new teacher is not it's not the same caliber, I would say.
Yeah.
Some are, the majority aren't. It's worrying because it's eroding the culture, this magical culture that both you and I think are so good.
Yeah, again, I don't know whether, like you mentioned now, the likes of the tertiary institutions, whether the JCE, the Johannesburg College of Educations, I always forget the college that was out in Pretoria, that a lot of the male staff, the Afrikaans men teacher would come from. And those teachers were the hardest teachers at school, for boys in particular. Now, and I think we did, I mean, because I went through co-ed schooling, I never went to a monastic school. But I think the benefit I had was that the teachers I was exposed to, particularly at high school, when you're a teenage boy and you're going through that hormonal change, and all of a sudden your body is doing all these crazy things, you've got sport as an outlet to just do everything you want to do, and you're aggressive, and then you're not, and you're all over the show. Boys are. They go through that phase where they're all over the show. To have those male teachers back in the day that we had, it wasn't quite an army experience, but those men often had been through the army, so you knew your place. And I think for a growing young man, one of the most important things, and again, this is my opinion, I'm not professing that I'm right at this, I'm not a specialist, but just my experience of being put in your place by an experienced, fair, just, hard, older male just is such an important thing. It was for me, and I think for a lot of people, it might not be everyone's taste, but it worked wonders. And I think monastic schools to this day still have more of that in a different way. But whether it's not, and it doesn't always come from the educators, I think just the hierarchy of the older boys and the younger boys, and particularly boys' monastic schools, you can see there's still that find your place, know your place type of thing happening. And for young boys, and I think the values that a young man needs to be taught around how to treat a woman or a girl, all that kind of stuff. And it's not in any way trying to demean any other gender or anything like that. But it's critical. You learn how to respect others and how to respect yourself.
Absolutely. Look, it's good old manners and values.
Yeah.
And I mean, 2 weeks ago, so we had our open day, so you walk parents around. And yes, our children know it's open day, so everyone's greeting, but that's typical of what Trinity is about. And the impression it creates is just, you don't need to say a thing.
Yeah.
Just walking around, those parents are sold. And it's just good old values that you're instilling. And you're right, you know, manners maketh the man. So forget Pythagoras, get the manners, and you'll be okay.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think there is definitely place for all the new stuff that the world is moving to. I mean, the world has changed in the last few years dramatically, and there are things we have to consider and changes happening. But there will always be place for old school values and morals and respect.
Absolutely. Good old decency. It will never be
outdated. Might not always be in the same scenarios as what we grew up with, but there will always be a place for it, I believe. I think Randpark definitely had that, and I still think Randpark has it. I mean, I think it's a school. it's what I found when I worked there. It's a little island because it's in that section of the suburb that's kind of it's surrounded by these roads, so you kind of don't really know it's there.
Yeah.
But once you drive through those gates, it feels like you're in an oasis or a little island. It's really impressive. I mean, I remember when Caitlin was going from grade 7 to high school, and we were afforded the opportunity to have an interview at Randpark. And I hadn't been back there for a few years. You know, obviously I coached there, but I hadn't been back for a while. And we were walking down the far top corridor of the far building, and it was coming up towards sunset. And just the way the light was on the facilities as you walk down there. And I remember saying to Megan and Caitlin, I was like, this is not an easy choice, you know. This is I kind of stepped out because I was like, I'm biased. Either way, I've worked at Trinity, Northcliffe, and Randpark, and I don't want to be the one making this decision because it's really hard for me. You know, my bloodline is Northcliffe, and my passion, it's my old school, so obviously that's where my heart is. But I could easily, I mean, I fitted in at Randpark straight away because of people like yourself and Anton and Alan and when Rob came along, and you know, we had this amazing group of people there. So I found a home there really quickly, and I always felt really welcome there. And then, you know, same, Northcliffe's an easy fit for me. It'll always be my easy fit. And even here, it's such an easy place to feel you belong there.
Sure.
I mean, I coached here from 1997. In the school, I was part of the first 4 student coaches.
Sure.
That ever coached or ever employed. I've still got my letter of employment with the from Hilton Scott and all that. Yeah, from 1997. So I go back to the day dot. Very fortunate, I think. So Randpark for me is also part of my makeup.
No, absolutely. And again, Alan and company they've invested huge amounts. The place every year you go there, there's just improvements and so forth. And I mean, as you say, that view, and it just brought another memory. I mean, we used to do a rugby camp, and part of it was to walk up the koppie that overlooks the school, and we'd take the boys up and we'd sit at the bottom of the cross, and you get the most amazing view of the field. But we'd say, listen, the next 5 minutes you're not going to say a thing. You're going to look at the field, look at the school, and you're just going to make some sort of commitment and some sort of link and whatever. And it was just, again, goosebump stuff. And often, before we'd run on the field, we'd gather in the matric circle, and the boys would look back up to the cross, and you didn't have to say anything. And then the game was just yours. So just, goosebump stuff, special stuff, chapter 2 in that book or whatever.
Yeah, that school had some special traditions. I remember the warm-ups of the first rugby team. We'd go from the gym to that little patch of grass between the buildings and this pool area, which was the most narrow place to take us to warm up. You'd sit in there and like, guys, if we can get the run through this narrow patch, now we're going to go in the field. You've got this width. This game's way easier. And I remember that was a very clever tactic. It was brilliant. I think also going back to the tour, and I think shout out to the Sean's and the Tara
came along for the girls'
Alan, and then Rob. There is some really legends of the game. People that have gone on and are still in education, whether it's in the Cape or whether it's overseas. Proper talented educators that I think, similar to your experience at Roosevelt, they gained the same exposure or opportunity, and maybe that's what Anton's goal was to take what you got at Roosevelt in a way, is groom a portion of the staff to a level that anyone new coming in under them gets that mentorship. Absolutely. And I think that's really, really probably why that kind of role worked.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. On that tour, I remember we went into the gym below the hotel, the first hotel. I think it was to unwind after that one kid had an epileptic fit in the foyer. I remember we were checking in, and we'd been on that flight. I think it was the flying to Argentina, and you hit those roaring 40s, and the plane's cruising on. And the next thing, it feels like the plane hits a wall, drops about 300 feet, and then carries on again. Everyone was like, "What was that?" Anton's on his second tour, and he just carries on reading his book. He didn't feel anything. But I remember we arrived there and we were checking in, and the next thing everyone's screaming because one of the boys is having an epileptic fit in the foyer. And then we went into that gym with the dodgy sauna and all those guys, and we were on the treadmill. And you actually you told me then that you'd been offered a position. I can't remember if it was Michael House or Hilton.
It was Hilton.
Hilton, yeah, and you weren't going to take it because you didn't see yourself working in a private school. And here we are today at a private school.
I did qualify by saying where you'd stay on the premises.
Yes. No,
it's related to going to the toilet and hearing boys on the other side, which is like, no.
Yeah. I'm being facetious with that one, but yeah, I think I mean that's also another feather in your cap. The fact that you probably had opportunities like that to go to other schools.
Look, I did. I had opportunity at St. David's and Hilton, and all fantastic schools. And just obviously my wife, you've got to factor in your wife, to factor in Danny and so forth, and then just that gut feel again. Just say the gut feel was what brought me to Trinity. Which was a strange one because they were the enemy. And I always remember the defining moment. I went for the interview, or the final part of the interview. The job offer was presented to me by a guy called Andries van Rensen, who was the general manager. And I said, listen, Andries, I want to play open cards. This position sounds very much shirt and tie. I'm the type of guy, 2 o'clock, I want to be in shorts. It's my passion. I want to teach history. And he said, I hear you, but you can't be Peter Pan forever. And again, it's one of those where, where you say it and just something clicks and you're right. And yes, I mean, I still miss those days. I'd love to get in shorts and fix the rugby and do this, that and the other. But he was right. It was time for the next sort of stage. And Trinity just presented that. I was amazingly happy at Randpark, and to be honest, probably too happy. I was in a comfort zone. People knew what I was about. I was on automatic, and I could have stayed there till retirement and lived happily. But it's not healthy. So the challenge was, of course, to come across, stop being Peter Pan and so forth. What was nice was initially it was as a senior deputy, so I could teach history, could coach rugby, and claim to fame I managed to put out 2 Trinity rugby teams in one age group. I think you helped me with that team, and it was a strong team. Unfortunately, a lot of those boys left in subsequent years, but good team, got mixed into the belt, which was a different level of rugby against those physically dominant Afrikaner boys who want to kill the Engelsman. But that was a hell of an experience, and certainly enjoyed that and so forth. In terms of my move to Trinity, besides being the big rivals and you want to beat them, I always admired them from a distance. So Danny came to the prep school, and it's just because I knew he'll be exposed to chess and he'll be exposed to tennis and cricket. Christianity played a big part in the decision. The academics will be good. High school was no certainty whatsoever. And again, personal moment when I told him I'd made the decision to come to Trinity. I thought there'd be excitement, and there was absolute tears. And he'll probably hate me for saying this. He pleaded. He said, Dad, you've got to change your mind.
Come to my school.
And I was just like, what is this? Look, grade 6 boykie, so 11 or 12, so he doesn't get the big picture. And I just sit down and listen, decision made, unlucky sausage cope. And he adjusted from that. But having said that, when I came across to Trinity, as much as I admired them, there were a couple of things which just took my admiration even higher. And you're going to laugh at me, but to hear their choir, now I'm no choir person, or certainly I wasn't. And suddenly you've got this 100-strong choir, phenomenal. I mean, they've toured to England on 2 occasions, sung in those cathedrals. The stuff they do is crazy. And then what's really blew my mind is you look a bit further into it, and singing in the choir is the flower and the prop. By the same token, we've got an orchestra, string, marimba, horn section. And again, you look at that and they're amazing. And there's the 8th man playing the violin. So to my mind, that was something I'd never ever seen. That a boy can be an absolute monster on a sports field, pick up his violin and do his thing. And to my mind, that is something that none of the other schools had ever been at. And no insult to them, because you work within the confines of what you've got. But that blew me away. In terms of the orchestra as well, we would go to orchestra festivals, so St. Stithians, Rodine, Kingsmead, all of these guys. And we're the only school that doesn't offer music, and yet we can have an orchestra on par with them. So that's probably one of my biggest frustrations at Trinity, is there's so much good happening here. And if you're part of it, but the outside community doesn't.
No, sure.
And it's hard to put it out there. And yes, social media helps, but I've always said we punch above our weight, and there's even more to that than actually gets exposed publicly, and it's something we need to work on more.
Yeah, so as you know, I work in schools marketing, and I'm torn a bit with that because I do feel there's some value and some, what the real word is, but you don't want everything to be told. You want to keep some of your stuff through word of mouth and let it become legend. If you're marketing everything you do, you take away the legend factor, in my mind. It's hard because, particularly in the private school environment, and as you know, working at the Kalami schools, very similar scenario. Bowley College is this enigma of talent in sectors that most South Africans look at schools and you go, oh, rugby, hockey, netball, that. And then Bowley College is known outside of Bowley for its hockey of the last 10 years. The hockey is world class.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a world class standard. And the question, obviously. But there's other things happening in that school that my role as the marketer is I've got to go and tell these stories. But you've got to get this balance right between prescriptive marketing and legend telling, or storytelling, or creating a legend. And I'm torn because I really believe not necessarily untold stories, but the making of legends that gets passed by word of mouth and by generations and by parents, I feel has a stronger value than just pure prescriptive marketing. So you've got to get the balance, because like you're right, you want to use social media to get key things out, but social media is not prescriptive marketing. Social media is just that. It should be social media. But to get it right, because you don't want to be prescriptive marketing your orchestra, competing or singing in a cathedral, because the consumer of that information isn't experiencing it. So the way that legend grows is when the children or the parents or the staff who were there tell the story, because they were there, and what you get from that is real passion and the experience of a storyteller versus a picture generated by a graphic designer who got a brief with a couple of hashtags that might
cold,
exactly. So it's that balance is critical, because you could go and market everything and you can push a million things out, but you might be not getting the crux or the core of that story out. You're just getting a picture or just getting a message out, and I think that's the hardest thing for schools. So I mean my dream is that schools don't feel that because they're like Randpark is in its little island there, Trinity's here, tucked away in a way as well. So is Bowley College. I don't want the schools to ever lose that nugget that makes them special by thinking they have to always be pushing that marketing angle down people's throats. You want to somehow find ways to get people in here, like you mentioned, the walkabouts and the greeting. You can't beat that marketing because the parent goes away feeling it.
They'll see the orchestra because part of the orchestra.
100%.
And I'll make a point. That's the eighth man.
100%.
You're right there.
A classic example. The new CEO at Kalami Schools, Tom Hamilton. We had the talk with him recently as well. He came on to Bowley's. He was walking around the campus the one day. I saw him. I bumped into him in the office the next morning, and he was telling me how he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was that gave him this goosebump experience. And he was just walking through the corridors, and he just said there was like a cacophony of sound and vision of kids doing this and those guys doing that and this happening. There was a life inside the campus, and I just laughed because I said that's the exact same thing I'm trying to figure out how to tell this to people but you can't, because you have to be there to experience it. You have to get this. And I think Trinity's very similar, Northcliffe's very similar, Randpark was exactly the same. Randpark, I know when I drive through those big brown gates and you've got that matric area, matric circle that you drive around, you can't help but know there's an energy that comes off that. The people have passed through that circle. That energy sits there, and you have to go there to experience. When you go on a tour, there has to be someone who tells you that story. And I think that's key for schools, is to get the stories told. And that's hopefully what I'm kind of trying to do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you did right, because it loses value in just a cold, superficial social media post. It lacks the genuineness. The only limitation is your reach, because
Yeah.
yes, people who live it will speak it, but how many people are they speaking to? But I get it. The other big thing, of course, with Trinity, and I didn't sort of know the extent of it, is of course the Christian ethos. Now, I came across as a Christian not a very good one, and I'd like to think that I've become a better one since, because again, it's one of those things that's not tangible. But many a person say, when they walk the corridors, they say they feel the Christian presence. And it manifests itself in so many ways. So first thing every morning is there's a staff meeting, and it's a devotion. And it's not necessarily a heavy-handed thunder and brimstone Old Testament judgment. It's people being genuine about what they're going through. And it puts the staff in a good place. From there, it rolls out to the kids. And what I often say to people when I meet with them is adolescence is a difficult time. And our basic minimum sort of thing that we will give your child is a daily Christian reminder to say, here's a message, Bible-based, here's a prayer. And it's a grounding, because it's certainly not happening enough out there. Many people have outsourced or forgotten about their religion and Christianity. And here we actually live it. And I think it's an absolutely good thing. I think it helps our children deal with adolescence, and it helps our school to deal with a lot of what it's going through. And certainly it's transformed the way I deal with things. And it's a daily sort of thing, which is good. It becomes habitual, which means it becomes part of your life.
Yeah, that grounding is critical. I think and by no means you're right. I don't think you have to be prescribing your faith onto anybody, but the values of your faith have a solid grounding from a Christian perspective, and that allows the children, like you say, that chance just to reflect. And sometimes they might see it as a burden because they've got to go through a prayer before this or that. But the reality is, after a while, you just need to get 4 or 5 children to realize the value of it and take that further into life. And again, it doesn't have to necessarily be that you're promoting any one thing per se. You're promoting a value and a devotion and a time to reflect and prepare your day. And that's, I agree. I think that's critical. It is what makes this place special.
Yeah.
It really does. And I think, and with that comes the benefits, because the kids see the value, they see it coming to life. They're able to be rewarded in what they've put down.
Yeah.
It's not just doing it for the sake of doing it. It's doing it because you know that an outcome will come from it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, an extension of that is living it through our sort of outreach program. And again, it's a pity because COVID's limited it. But the relationship with Kingsway is just amazing.
Yeah.
And to have their children come on our premises in the shallow swimming pool, water safety, doing homework, shooting hoops on the netball court or whatever. Just the value that our children get from that and that their children get. I mean, that's the greatest education ever.
Yeah.
Because you're coming from your Eagle Canyon address and you're now seeing what this little person is going through and you're engaging with them.
Yeah.
And it's just, to my mind, again, that's goosebump stuff.
Yeah. No, it is.
And again, it's not, yes, we put it on social media, but you've got to see it in person. When those little people come and write you a little note to say thank you for doing this with me, it's crazy.
Special.
And that's what makes the place special as well.
Yeah, it is special. Do you think the only limiting factor here has always been the ground, the land? The land has been, this was built initially as a hospital.
Correct.
And then obviously became the school. There's always been that extra piece of land threatened to become another field or an old boys centre or a gym or whatever. But it's always been, it's fascinating how Trinity's managed to get 3 schools through this piece of property. And without, and there's softball on any given day. There's cricket, softball, rugby, netball. There's now a hockey astro in the middle of it all, which there wasn't space for. There's a hockey. So tennis, athletics.
And we've introduced soccer. So that
soccer.
sounds classic.
Yeah, and it's but it's
the same field that has the athletics track.
Yes.
Is also got the football field. You're trying to prepare the cricket decks, and it is ludicrous.
Yeah.
It's just, as I said, if we could have another 3-4 fields, I'd keep my
fill
left
them,
arm.
and I think
Absolutely.
we should fill them. Yeah.
Absolutely, but there's just no room, so we've got to be clever in terms of that.
Yeah, I still think that this school, this particular Trinity, became the reason. Maybe the reason's also a bit of, I'm being a bit cheeky with the word reason, but it's the reason why private schools blossomed like they did between 1996, 97, and to this day. Trinity was the benchmark. Trinity was the example that look at what you can do. Look at how you can, and this is, I mean, I know the founders like Dr. Staples and Mr. Brown and all of them, they were all big part of that, and I think they had that vision to do something like this. But the knock-on effect of the Advotechs taking over, the Trinities of the world, the Kiros coming around, I'm convinced they would drive past along this road and look in here and come past and see what's happening and get an idea. And every school since then, I mean, at Kalani, there's 38 schools in a 14-kilometer radius. Only one of them is not a private school.
Sure.
You know, so the blossoming effect of private schooling in South Africa, I think this was one of the first, not one of the first private schools, because the Crawfords were around already, but it was one of the first to literally show you how a newborn private school can take on the big hitters.
No, absolutely. I mean, they were pioneers, and it was a real leap of faith. You know, as you said, Dr. Staples, Ron Brown and company literally took their retirements and their pension funds and invested it. You know, and as you said, the bank's backup plan was designing to look like a clinic. So if it goes belly up, it will be a clinic.
Yeah.
And it's quite funny when I walk parents around, I often debate, should I tell them the story? Because I say, once you hear it, it's going to spoil the place forever.
Great for COVID.
No, yeah. When you tell them, they say, oh, you shouldn't have told me. But we make it work. But yeah, I mean, real leap of faith. And I think all the things we've spoken about in this conversation is what made it a success. They identified the opportunity, the need, the location, and they knew private schools, strong Christian ethos, holistic education, emphasis on sport. There is a demand in this area.
Yeah.
So leap of faith, and when you speak to Claire Pretorius and the like, when they signed up, it was an open space with 2 caravans.
Yeah.
We literally went in to sign up in a caravan.
Yeah.
And within the blink of an eye, the place just turned the corner. And you know, where they were blessed was the people who bought into it were wealthy, they were up and coming.
Yeah.
And it just blew up from there. And again, they didn't go, and I think some private schools make this mistake, and start at the bottom, we'll play Blackies United and whatever. Straight from the off, they went against Randpark, and they went against Cares and all of that. And yes, they took hidings initially, but they said that's our standard. And they were really blessed. I mean, the type of kids they got at that stage, you know, to get Dale Deeb and Graham Hume into SA schools cricket, Little Trinity, I mean, that is crazy.
Yeah.
So it shows the caliber of person they got was good, but it wasn't lucky because they had something that attracted that caliber of person. So therefore, from there, and by the time Advotech bought them, you know, the die was cast. This was a success, and Advotech could just take that momentum and just fine tune it a bit, and the upward trajectory continued.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think you're mentioning obviously the Deebs of the world and the Humes of the world, and again, this place has produced talent.
Crazy talent
for a small school. And when you say small school, you know, you've got the likes of, you know, 1 team per age group, sometimes 2. Literally, particularly if you take a rugby or a hockey example, you've got them for a limited amount of time because they are in the choir, they are doing a million other things. So that bottleneck effect is so much more dangerous because you can burn the kids out. They're expected, and I know that this school in particular, your expectations from an academic point of view are supreme. You're expected to perform academically. It's ingrained in them every single day, and I know that because my kids were at the prep school. So that's core, and they still produce it. The kids are, I think that's an accolade to the staff that work here.
No, absolutely. Look, it's a team thing, you know, and as you said, the children, you just shake your head, and I always use old Chris Humphreys as an example because he was just the poster boy in so many ways. So he was the head boy, he was the cricket captain, he was the quickest boy in North Area, so won gold medals at Prestige and so forth. Rugby captain, Craven Wheat B team captain, and sang in the choir. You know, now to be touched by God like that is crazy. What does he do now? Wits Varsity Cup Fluff and medical student.
Yeah.
And not Kokololi medical student, cutting the business. And to my mind, that's a Trinity child.
Yeah.
Now, they can't all be to the extent of Chris, but they can tick all those boxes and just be multi-skilled and dynamic and amazing. And it's their ability, their parents, and then the teachers. I mean, the support structures here.
Yeah.
The teachers just will hold your hand and give you that academic support like you won't believe. You know, Carl Stein, who's now playing for Scotland, you know, full Scottish international, little boy from Trinity, and that's crazy. So it's really, the school really has got a lot to be proud of.
And I agree, the staff, I mean, and it goes back to what I said earlier, you mentioned Claire Pretorius. So Claire was one of my teachers at school, at Northcliffe High, and I think what they did well in those early days is they went and handpicked key performers, people that they knew were up and coming, weren't maybe necessarily going to get the opportunity that they would where they were at the same time, and they knew that that's the thing most people would want. If they get an opportunity, they want to take it when they have the energy for it.
Yeah.
I mean, my first ever car was, I nearly bought my first car, was Claire's old little white Renault, the Renault 5. I even came and took it for a test drive and everything, and I think they decided to keep it, but it was just like, she was my teacher, Mrs. Pretorius. Even when I worked here for a few years, you still used to call her Mrs. Pretorius or ma'am.
Yeah.
It's just weird how it is. But
That
I think pulling that caliber of staff member here was critical, and I think now keeping that going.
To sustain it.
Yeah,
as you say, the difficulty is you can't throw a stone without hitting a private school now.
Yeah.
So the competition's huge. And that's where, the whole thing about your marketing and your extras, because everyone expects the 100% pass rate.
Yeah.
Everyone expects the 98% university entrance. The academics almost a given. What more can you give me?
What else do you give?
What more bang for my buck? And
Yeah.
that's the fight we're all having. And as I say, Trinity, I think, is winning that fight, but there's still not enough people know about the magic that's here.
Well, okay, that's what we've got this thing for. So, you mentioned Chris. If Chris ever gets to see it, there's the bunnies. I heard the story of the bunnies, but that to me is the magic. When I nearly bumped this off the counter, you got quite upset that it was going to break the bunnies. Although they have been broken before, I can see where the glue and they obviously get knocked over a lot. But I think that's the magic, where you can have a relationship with a young kid like Chris, who is an outlier. I think we all want kids like that, but you can't produce that kind of talent all the time. That talent comes to you almost, you just got to mold it. But to have a relationship where you can have your internal story of, teasing each other, and then he gives you this gift, which only you and him know the story, and then that story lives on because now it gets bumped over by anyone who walks in here and goes, I was like, what the hell is that? And then you tell the story. And I think that's that nugget I was trying to explain earlier, where you can't put that into marketing. That is literally, I don't want to kill your bunnies, but that's what I think schools have to have, is this balance between respect for your teacher, but the ability for the teacher to come down to a level where the child is treated especially in high schools, is treated as an adult or a grown adult, and when they leave, they're able to have that relationship still, where they bump into each other at a pub one day or at a shopping center one day or whatever. That person is seen as a mentor, and you can, whether it's leave behind a cool little gift or whatever it might be. I think that is what we definitely need as part of the stories of schools. You can't put that into social media. You can't put that into marketing.
No.
But
even the book majors struggle to translate it, because it's the warm fuzzy stuff.
Yeah.
When you meet them and firstly you remember their name, you just see the absolute glow. And I always say I remember the good kids and the bad kids. The middle kids, I don't always remember them.
Yeah.
But it's like Eden Hunter, I forget what his surname now is, who was at Randpark.
Yes.
So of course Eden was the head girl, coached her for athletics, and just amazing stories. And when you see her now, and the person she's become, an Olympic captain and so forth, and you played a small part, not that you ever claim it, that's the amazing sort of things. And it's when you meet them, because they're now parents and they're adults and whatever, and they'll come across and say, listen, I remember you and thank you for what you did for me. That's worth all the paychecks and the glory and whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But without building up the suspense, the story behind the Chris Bunnies is Chris was the head boy, and needless to say, I always have banter, so there's chirps and so forth, and I think I've taught the Trinity kids to be less respectful and a little bit more chirpy. But Chris always used to go about at my hair, or my lack of hair, and I said, Chris, don't worry, I'm going to get a tattoo of rabbits on my head. And he said, rabbits, why? I said, no, from a distance, rabbits look like ears. And of course, Chris took that to heart and bought me the bunnies.
Okay.
But again, there's an absolute million stories that you could share. And, it's like you say, you'll be at a pub or a shopping center or whatever, and you'll meet an old boy or old girl. And A, you'll remember them, and B, the stories will just start cascading
Yeah.
like you will not believe.
Yeah, and they flow and stuff that you don't even remember, or sometimes you don't remember what that child remembered about you. I mean, Randpark boys in particular, I remember we had that really strong junior side when I was working there in 2005, and then matriculated when I came back and helped with the first team that year, and those guys were they were strong, they were good, especially in the junior level. And I remember we played at the Parktown Boys Under 14 Rugby Festival. That beginning of the season, we only played 20 minutes a game, and we were smashing everybody. And we played a game against St Albans, and St Albans beat us in that game. And by but not by much, by about 3 points. And we went 5 points. I can't remember the exact score, but we played well, and we still had a game after that. And I mean, they were like by far the better team of all the teams there. And the guys came off the field, and we ripped into them like as if they had literally lost the war. Like these poor kids were blown away, and they like couldn't believe it. And then it was like a reverse psychology. I think we met Krugersdorp or someone after that game. And in 20 minutes, I think we scored about 60 points. And then they came to school on Monday thinking that they were like the heroes. And we just nailed them for the St Albans loss. And then then when I bump into them, they like always come in, that group always said to me, yeah, you remember, you made us puke on the Monday after we only lost one game out of like 5, and we only just lost them. And you still made us puke, and you like killed us for fitness just because we lost the one game. And they remember that. I always kind of forget it, but whenever I see those guys, they remind me of it. And they're like, why did you do that to us? Like, you didn't have to do that. We knew. But then they said, but they never ever wanted to lose a game ever again, because they knew if you lose a game on the Monday, you're going to get killed by Mr. Right. So just win every game.
It's easier.
And that was the story. And they still, like, I bump into the guys at Touch Rugby or wherever, marking them, and they always say, they always like remind me of that episode of.
They were fantastic. Their parents were even more fantastic. Of course, lots of stories to them.
Yeah, there was a special bunch of parents and passion.
Very much and supportive, and that you can live with. Yes, they may get in your ear, but they invested, they're supportive. So
really cool. So I think we've been talking for quite a while. We can call it. I know you've got a job to get to.
I do.
But thank you for taking this time.
Pleasure.
I'm always going to be an admirer of you as an educator and as a friend. It is you're one of our class is one of my friends. So I don't know if that's a good thing. You just keep your mouth shut.
Diplomacy.
I'm the Batman. You can be Robin. But I'm glad you didn't dress up as Batman and Robin. It wouldn't have gone down well. Although I did come here one day. I don't know if you know. I pitched up here as Batman.
I did.
To fetch my kids from school.
I remember that.
They tell that story. Caitlin threatened me not to come and walk down the corridors in the Batman suit, and it was a full-on Batman suit. It wasn't something that just a little play one. It was a proper suit. And if we can finish with this story, I suppose, but because we had Trinity. But the best was I can't remember the name of the guy. It was the flank in the team, and he'd been kicked out of class. He was in one of the corridors. And I'd fetched the little ones from the nursery school, and I was walking down to find Caitlin in her classroom, and I had to go past through the high school, and he had been kicked out. So he was looking through the window, trying to tease his friends from outside the corridor, and he didn't see me coming. And as I walked past him, they all could see me because the glass from the classrooms I can see. So all the class, you could see they're like, what the hell is that? And then he's like going, ah, and I put my hand on his shoulder, and I can't remember which it was. And I called out his name, but in like a Batman voice. I said, behave yourself. And he didn't know what this was. He just sat down and sat there. And then everyone was just like, what is going on? But I thought it was just classic because I knew, and he didn't know it was me, and I was his coach.
Yeah.
He didn't know it was me. He was like, yes, Batman, what the hell? That was kind of a funny Batman story.
Should I beat the green tracksuit you pitched in once?
Yes, the green tracksuit, the Rabbitohs. That was the Rabbitohs tracksuit at Randpark. And I suppose, thanks, and all the best for more stories. Hopefully we don't break any kids' ankles and make them play on in the rugby game. That was our worst.
He went on to be head boy, so I think the break was Tulani fixed him up.
Yeah, Tulani still is Megan's patient to this day. So
really? Still from the ankle?
Other ankle, because he broke his ankle
playing
football. He was playing in a men's team in his first year out of school, and And he's talented kid. I mean, Tulani was really talented. He would have been more talented had you and I not forced him to play a rugby game with a broken ankle. But he got that. His second break on his other ankle, I think, was much worse.
Sure.
But he's an amazing guy. I mean, he's often at our house, or when he treats patients all last year at home for physio treatments at home. We had a home room, and now she's got her other rooms. But yeah, Tulani's been a patient, since the early days. Yeah, nice to see him growing up into a nice young man as well. The top kid from the school.
Sure.
Yeah, we'll end it there.
100%. Thanks,
Okay,
thanks for the
appreciate it.
opportunity. Good luck with the rest, and
Maybe we'll come back for more.
that's enough. I've got more.
In 5 years' time, more stories.
Sure. I'm still young. Fired on Monday.